Margaret Brundage's 1933 Weird Tales Batwoman image has influenced everything from Batman to fashion shoots. It's as iconic as any single image in the rich and fascinating world of pulp illustrations. But artists don't set out to make works that become iconic images, and yet when they achieve that extraordinary feat, we can examine the image as a powerful and timely coalescing of aesthetic, social, and even psychological trends. Let's take a quick look at the context of her Batwoman image, both in terms of Weird Tales and the broader cultural movements, and then we will look at the painting's influence on Batman, Batgirl, fantasy art, and even fashion. Almost all of the 66 covers that Margaret Brundage did for Weird Tales in the 1930s and 40s correspond to an identifiable passage in one of the stories, and that story is always listed in the magazine masthead as being illustrated by Brundage. And though she was an illustrator, her work is so powerful precisely because of the artistic license she takes with images, often finding a visual poetics that matches the emotional core of the scene rather than sticking to a strict literalism. Often her work feels like it has poured out of a dream. However, in her most famous cover, no story at all is listed in the magazine masthead. The obvious answer, since bats are forever associated with vampires, is that it is an illustration of the story named on the cover, Hugh Davidson's The Vampire Master. But there's nothing at all in the story that comes close to her image. There is, however, an absolutely mesmerizing short story by Mary Elizabeth Councilman called The Catwoman, a brief and unusual tale of anthropomorphism. I love this little horrific yet strangely enchanting tale that anticipates both Cat People films. A young fellow moves into a rooming house and is immediately struck by the evocative and alluring green-eyed Mademoiselle Chat Blanc, who immediately reminds him of a cat. She has a beautiful white cat who is fond and physically affectionate with the narrator, but strangely, Cat and Madame Chat Blanc never appear together, though Madame starts exhibiting the same purring and rubbing up against him feline qualities of affection the cat does. I hope you read it. No spoilers here, but this story of the merging of identities between cat and woman is, I think, the poetic core that helped inspire her picture. So, Bat works with the vampire story and the merging of identities with Catwoman. But this poetic merging, without alluding to a specific scene, freed Brundage of all literalism and unleashed and fully freed her as an artist. And so this image, more art than illustration, born of creative fire and her own unconscious, makes it fair to ask, what were other artists doing in 1933 while Margaret Brundage was painting her beautiful nocturnal image of bats, masks, cowls, and a green-eyed woman with beautiful hands? Since I don't really believe the separation between popular culture and fine art is quite what we are led to believe, let's go to the most allegedly highbrow writer of the time and see what concerns James Joyce might have had in 1933 with night and with masks and with bats. Well, having published Ulysses, the most complete book of a single day ever written in 1922, he was working on a book of the night, literally finding a language to express the dark protean intricacies of dream states, night consciousness, and night. Finnegan's Wake is not just a hymn to night, but a hymn to the intersection of self and night. Any place for bats? You bet. In an intensely lyrical passage capturing the very rhythms of the nature of night, he mentions bats twice, flittering bats and the balk of bats. Shut your eyes and ask if Joyce doesn't get bats and night just right where they swim into human consciousness in those liminal fluid states of sleep and dreaming. It's an astonishing passage. Can't hear with the waters of, the chittering waters of, flittering bats, field mice, bok talk. Can't hear with the balk of bats. Oh, I feel as old as yonder elm. Dark hawks hear us. My hoe head halls, I feel as heavy as yonder stone. Now tell me, elm, tell me, night, tell me a tale of stem or stone besides the rivering waters of, the hither and thithering waters of night. The chittering waters of, flittering bats, can't hear with the balk of bats beside the rivering waters of, the hither and thithering waters of night. Now, the photograph of Joyce is by the photographer and sometimes surrealist Man Ray. This is probably Man Ray's most famous image, which he photographed just 7 years before Brundage's work. And like Brundage's work, it is a woman with a mask, and while she's not wearing it, part of the power of the image is the visual similarity between the mask and the model, who is Kiki du Montparnasse, and since she is in a state of repose with her eyes closed, there's a kind of dreamy merging of mask and psyche, with the power of the mask and the power of Kiki flowing back and forth in a kind of dreamy interfusion. In a way, surrealism is giving voice and visual expression to dream. Where does our identity end, and where does the mask begin? Do we put on power with putting on our masks, our cowls, our merging with the rivering waters on, hithering, thithering waters of night? And keep in mind, this was the age of Freud, and the unconscious interpretation of dreams was only 33 years old when Brundage made her picture. These are images that not only spill out of the unconscious, or in Jungian terms, out of the collective unconscious, but deeply engage the interception and interfusion of conscious and unconscious. Both Man Ray's image and Brundage's involve a woman in a mask, and questions are raised about the nature of mask and identity, and a stage, a kind of claiming of power and of a different kind of beauty, important stuff, icon-making stuff. And as a measure of its perceived cultural relevance, a print of Noir et Blanche broke all sorts of auction records when it sold in 2017 at Christie's for over $3 million. In my previous video on Brundage, I talk at some length about how many weird tale stories involve some kind of merging of identity between human and animals, and with putting on some new strength and powers as characters assume the identity or merge with an animal. And Brundage did a fabulous job of visually exploring those themes. A woman wakes to find herself with all the power, speed, and ferocity of a wolfish dog, and kind of likes that she can now run on all fours faster than an ordinary person ever could. Brundage stood out as an extraordinary illustrator from her earliest work with Weird Tales, but there were still other artists hungry to do covers. A truly splendid non-Brundage cover from just a year before illustrates Hugh Cave's Goose Flesh Vampire Story. I'm quite sure Brundage was struck by this cover and probably ruminated on it quite a bit. Bats and women. Or bats and men. There has always been something beautifully and darkly uncanny about bats. Night creatures, blind yet seeing, the stuff of nightmare and dreams certainly. This is Goya from 1799, The Sleep of Reason Breeds Monsters, and here come the bats flittering with their bok talk into his dreams. And what of Batman? Want a dark, noir superhero? What better than draw from the mythic resonances of bats? It's 1939, after all, just 6 years after the Brundage image. The war to end all wars hadn't worked, and after a decade of depression, war is looming again. Auden had just written In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. In the cities, noir feels thick. Shadows, shadows. A dark noir superhero? Early in 1939, readers of Detective Comics encountered this tiny advertisement announcing Batman in the future issue, an image as familiar as a recurring dream. Then it was on May 1939, and Detective Comics introduced Batman to the world. A year later, it was a standalone issue. 1947, it's Catwoman looking very, very Brundage-ish. And then it's Batgirl on the cover in 1961. And we've come full circle. Well, almost, because here we are, 82 years later, after the launch of Batman, and that world shows no sign of slowing down. The dark, dreamy, illimitable style of Brundage keeps spilling into the unfinished, whether it's Gotham or goth, fantasy painting, or even fashion. I will end with one of my favorite images anywhere, shot by photographer Steve Rainwater of model Hope Sexton. I think they capture the spirit of Brundage with an uncanny and joyous accuracy. Brundage would be thrilled. Thank you for watching this. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe.